Shabi, journalist and author, whose new book, Off-White, The Truth About Anti-Semitism, will be published next month. And Sam Kiley, security analyst, he will be continuing to join me on the programme over the next hour. And then we'll take more of your calls after your questions on Cross Question after 9. 0345 6060 973. And we're streaming live on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has spoken to his Israeli counterpart and the King of Jordan following the launch of around 200 Iranian missiles towards Israel. A spokesperson for Keir Starmer says he completely condemns Iran's actions. LBC's Middle East correspondent Trent Murray says ominous noises are coming from Benjamin Netanyahu's government.
Israeli media is now reporting that a number of officials are briefing here that the response to Iran from Israel will be, and I'm going to quote here, unlike anything they've ever seen before.
Hamas has praised tonight's Iranian attack on Israel, saying it's avenging assassinations. At the same time, Israeli police are saying 6 people have been killed and 2 shooters have been neutralized following an attack in the Jaffa part of Tel Aviv. Iran's also claimed 80% of its missiles did hit their targets. Israel says there have been no casualties. Sam Kiley is an expert on Middle Eastern affairs. He's been telling Iain Dale this attack will be compared with the last one 6 months ago.
Back in April, they fired about 300. Very, very few of those got through, and none of them did any significant damage because they were shot down by Israel, Britain and the United States.
There's full coverage on this evening's Iranian attack on Israel here on LBC with Iain Dale and then Ben Kentish. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 9 points at 82.46. The pound will buy $1.32 and €1.20. LBC weather, a mostly cloudy night with some light showers for much of England and Wales, largely dry further north with a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Tim Daly.
This is LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. If you've just joined the programme, it's Cross Question over the next hour, our almost daily panel debate programme. We have with us on the panel tonight, to my far left, Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat Cabinet Office spokesperson and MP for Richmond Park, almost a veteran of the programme now, I think.
I think so, yeah.
I think that was a banned term.
Well, it is for you and me, because we're too old. Sam Kiley is here, international affairs-focused writer and broadcaster and security analyst. To my right, Rachel Shabi, journalist and author, whose new book, Off-White, The Truth About Anti-Semitism, will be published next month. We'll hear a little bit more about that later in the hour. And Alistair Burt, former Conservative Middle East and North Africa Minister, who was also an International Development Minister. They're here to answer your calls, your questions, 0345 6060 973. Now, we're expecting a statement from the Prime Minister at 8:30. We'll take that live. The Department of Defence, they're holding a press briefing sometime in the next hour. We'll bring you what they have to say. Also, Keir Starmer has issued a statement already. He says the UK has condemned Iran's attack on Israel today in the strongest terms and expressed the UK's steadfast commitment to Israeli security and the protection of civilians. Meanwhile, the US says Iran's attack is a significant escalation and has been defeated. And tonight, an Iranian official has warned that if Israel strikes back against Iran, there will be an even more destructive second wave of missile attacks launched. Now, the way I interpret that is that they won't be launching more missiles unless Israel does attack again. Would you agree with that interpretation, Sam?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's been exactly the issue facing the Iranians and indeed the Israelis is that calibration as to how they respond. We've seen it on a much lower level in the past over the border with Hezbollah prior even to October 7th, these tit-for-tat exchanges of fire, diplomats call them, willy-waving. This is much more profound and much more dangerous. But once Iran has had its say and responded, it's clear that it doesn't want to go any further, wants to focus itself internally. The hope will be
a glimmer of light there, then.
Yeah, exactly. So the hope will be that the Israelis take that on board and don't themselves further escalate. Now it's a tactical and strategic decision for the Israelis.
Right, let's go to a call or a question. It's from Scott in West Hampstead. Scott, hi.
Hello, Ian. Hello, panel. My question is this. Could Israel's incursion into Lebanon and Iran's attack on Israel tonight lead to a wider Middle East conflict? And what could be the security and the economic implications for Israel, the region, and the West?
Alistair, Burt.
Well, Scott, how long have you got? You are asking the fundamental question, quite rightly, that we all are. I'll start by saying that there have always been restraints against the possibility of a wider war. Let me give you two or three. Firstly, before October the 7th, a number of states in the region were working, more closely together. The Saudis had reached out to the Iranians had reached out to the UAE. There was the prospect of them taking more regional decisions. They were moving away from the Americans telling everybody what to do and making their own decisions. There were, of course, the efforts to bring relations with Israel rather closer. There was a different sort of Middle East. October the 7th has changed absolutely everything. But most of the states, almost all the states, none of them can achieve their objectives for their economies and their peoples if there is a significant regional war, which will be massively destructive. And those restraints are still there. Iran has had a number of attacks launched against it in the recent past. The assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader on Iranian soil, the loss of the killing of some of their top military commanders. And their response has been relatively muted because their options are quite limited. They know that an all-out attack on Israel would lead to significant reprisals, which they're not going to be strong enough to withstand. The risk of the missile barrage, of course, is that if one lands in a significant civilian area, if there's a loss of Israeli civilian lives, Israel has made it very clear that that changes the picture altogether. It could be that this missile attack has been a little bigger, but not dissimilar to the one in April that was knocked back by others, and they may feel that enough's enough. And I agree with Sam. If people just accept at present that there's been a bit more of a tit for tat, a bit more extreme, but then start talking about what they need to talk about, maybe we can move on from here. But the risk of miscalculation is significant.
And that's what often causes wider conflict, isn't it? The miscalculation by just one of the participants.
Yes.
Rachel Shabi.
Well, the thing that needs to happen, as Alistair, I'm assuming, suggests, is a ceasefire, of course. The political option was only ever the only option, right from the start. October 7, yes, but obviously going back decades, there was only ever one solution, and that was political. And the trouble is here that we have an Israeli government that is out of control. It's hard to look at this situation and not see that Israel is being the irrational actor in this.
How is it irrational? I mean, they had to respond, surely, to the Hezbollah rockets that were being fired over. They've done it in a very different way than they did in Gaza. It seems to be much more targeted. They couldn't have just sat back and done nothing, could they?
I don't think anything that you just said is true. I think of course, Israeli citizens should be able to go and live in the north where 60,000 have been evacuated. Of course, that's obvious. The question is, how do you go about that? Israel's pager attacks on Lebanon were, even according to a former CIA head, an act of terror. The invasion,
they were targeted at Hezbollah terrorists.
That was not a targeted attack.
Yes, it was. They were all of the pages.
Well, if you're going to keep interrupting me, I'm not going to be able to actually say anything.
I mean, if you say something which I think is wrong, I'm going to say just as you're saying things
the former head of the CIA has said unquestioningly those were a terror attack. If you booby trap a load of pagers and other devices to go off randomly in public areas, then inevitably people are going to get injured, innocent people, and that's exactly what happened. Thousands of people were injured. And then you look at taking out Hassan Nasrallah, which was just an epic bombardment, use of bombs in civilian areas that are...
Their headquarters were under the building that was bombed.
I don't care. It doesn't justify that epic loss of life. This is a civilian area in the middle of a large functioning city, just like any other large functioning city. You do not get to pulverize and terrorize innocent people like that.
Well, surely you should be condemning Hezbollah from having their headquarters in that kind of area.
But where does that end? One could condemn the British Army for having its headquarters in Downing Street. It's a ridiculous argument. You cannot go after civilians in the way that Israel just did. It is anyone with a moral compass can see that that is wrong. And what we're left with here in this situation with you responding in the way that you're responding is that we have Lebanese people and Palestinian people who have been killed and maimed and terrorized in such epic proportions, reduced to the indignity of pleading for you to see their humanity.
Well, I think it's very interesting that you, in your various answers there, you haven't condemned Hezbollah once. All of your fire has been targeted on Israel.
Why? It should be obvious. I am not going to sit here and be a cheerleader for Hezbollah, not for its indiscriminate bombardment of Israel. Certainly lots of people in Syria are no big fans of Hezbollah after they helped Bashar al-Assad maim and target and kill and starve civilian people. And it's worth saying as well that a big chunk of Lebanon are no big fans of Hezbollah either. But that's not the issue here. The issue here who is being the regional aggressor? Who has been bombarding Gaza to such an epic degree? Oxfam just released today a survey that said that more women and children were killed in Gaza by Israel than any other recent conflict in a single year. It is horrifying. It is apocalyptic.
Okay.
And what is your response to that? What is our response to that?
I'm not here to give my response to that. I'm here to question you, which is what I hope I've done. Sarah Olney.
Well, I think the only thing that we can say with kind of any certainty is that whenever there is, an escalation of violence like this, the only thing you can be certain of is that there's going to be severe civilian innocent lives lost, and that has obviously been the situation over the last 12 months. And that's why the Liberal Democrats have been calling from a very early stage for an immediate bilateral ceasefire in Gaza, between Israel and Gaza. That's why we've been extremely concerned about the escalation of hostilities that we've seen over the last week in Lebanon. We have called on the Foreign Secretary. We've repeated our calls for an immediate bilateral ceasefire. What we want to see, I think, and we've been calling for this for a long time, we've recognised that Iran playing a very, very destabilising role in the region. And what we want to see in this country is that the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, be proscribed. And I think it's long past time that happened, to send a very, very clear message.
Why hasn't it, do you think?
I don't know is the quick answer to that. I have a lot of British Iranian constituents. It's something that I have been engaging with for a number of years now, speaking to my Iranian constituents about their experiences, about their contacts still in Iran, about in particular things that have been happening over the last few years. The death of Mahsa Amini, for example. It felt a few years ago that was going to be the start of perhaps a new beginning in Iran, that might be the time when ordinary people, women in particular, were able to start having a voice, and that seems to have receded a little bit. But I really want the UK to be at the forefront of pushing for
and how fearful are you? I mean, let's go back to Scott's question. How fearful are you that this could lead to a wider Middle East conflict?
Extremely fearful. And as I say, the only thing we know about when there is an escalation of violence is that innocent people are going to lose their lives. And I think the international community is pretty much united in saying there must be a ceasefire, because there's only one certain outcome. And as you were saying yourself, it's very much, it's so finely balanced at the moment, and one wrong move could be, absolutely, devastating. So that's why, the Liberal Democrats are very clear, and have been clear for a long time, we want to see a ceasefire.
Sam Kiley, how much do you fear a wider conflict?
That would I fear it, because the consequences would be ghastly. For the people in the region, I don't think it's a particularly problematic to Great Britain in a strategic sense. It certainly doesn't compare to the dangers being unfolding or somewhat ignored at the moment in Ukraine. But I think that whether or not it escalates significantly will really depend on the relative military power and the assessments thereof. This boils down to kind of gruesomely calculating moments of leadership and generalship in which the different sides work out whether or not, excuse me, they can actually win. At the moment, it would appear, particularly with the backing inevitably of the United States, which has been reiterated since these Iranian attacks on Israel, that Israel has the upper hand. It may therefore give Israel enough confidence to hold its line at this point and go no further. That will depend on the extent to which, even privately, they come under pressure from the United States. And that, I think, is the real issue here, is whether or not the Biden administration is prepared to put that pressure on, particularly in these dying days of an electoral campaign.
OK. Right, we will move on in just a moment. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
For details.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
18 minutes past 8 on LBC. Sarah Olney from the Liberal Democrats, Alistair Burt, former Conservative Middle East Minister, Rachel Shabi, journalist and author, and Sam Kiley, security analyst. They're here answering your questions. We have Simcha in Jerusalem on the line now. Simcha, very good evening. What's your question, please?
My question is, now we've seen how a second time Iran have tried to attack Israel and failed miserably, and as in they've properly tried, you can see from the way they've been launched. Now, also you can see that Hezbollah has been weakened. Does this potentially mean that Israel now be emboldened enough to know that Iran can't do a massive counterattack if they now try to go and strike their nuclear silos and bases?
Rachel Shabi, and I promise not to interrupt you.
Yeah, I bet you won't you? You won't be able to help yourself. I think that's a really good question. I don't know. I'm not an Iran expert, but what I do know is that certainly Israel has made that calculation. The Israeli government has made that calculation that it's going to call Iran's bluff and go all out. Otherwise, it would never have green-lighted that horrendous bunker bomb blitzing of Beirut that obliterated a block of flats, and in so doing killed Hassan Nasrallah, who died of shock, by the way. That's the severity of the magnitude of that explosion. It's worth saying, though, that in both cases of Iran's attack, they gave plenty of notice, right? So the first time, there was a couple of hours' notice, right? That was 6 months ago. This time there was less notice, it was 12 minutes, but certainly enough time for Israel to evacuate areas that needed to be evacuated buildings rather, and get its Iron Dome system ready to go. We don't know. We don't know what will happen. That's the whole point. We don't know what will happen with escalations if Israel decides to respond, if Israel continues its invasion of Lebanon. This whole thing is happening because all of these countries, or parts of the Axis, are in some way opening up fronts to support Gaza, having watched the apocalyptic war that Israel is waging there. This will all stop the minute there is a ceasefire. And one has to say, looking at the behaviour of the US and the West, that there's absolutely been no real pressure and no appetite for that, which is why so many Palestinians in Gaza, and now Lebanese people as well, see this as the US's war as much as it is Israel's.
I kept my promise.
Well done.
I nearly didn't, but I did. Sam?
Well, I'd be intrigued, Alistair, to ask you, as a former minister, you've dealt with the Israelis. As a journalist, I've lived there twice. I've written thousands and thousands of words about how the West Bank settlements were inimical to the future security of Israel. And, of course, what's been going on in Gaza is even more so. And to a degree, the campaign against Hezbollah and Hezbollah's campaign against Israel proves that point. Why do you think, though, no doubt there's a point. Was that a point you were making to the Israelis? And why do you think that they struggle to hear it? When I say the Israelis, I mean the Netanyahu administration. My apologies.
The governments of all complexions have worked on the basis that keeping a line open to Israel and being listened to by Israel was important, and that there were certain criticisms that, if made, Israel would simply turn off and you would lose your opportunity to make a point to them. That has credibility if there's any evidence that Israel actually listens and does anything in response to criticism and to correction. By and large, Israel acts entirely in its own interests. The Netanyahu government acts in Israel's interests and in the interests of Mr. Netanyahu. There will not be a ceasefire until Israel decides it wants a ceasefire and needs a ceasefire. No outside pressure will produce this. I think we all have to be very clear on this. It is absolutely...
Sorry to interrupt, but outside pressure did produce the Oslo peace process. The United States stood up very publicly and said, you don't sign up, we're going to turn off the money spigot.
Yeah, but that was afterwards, and we can have a discussion of what will happen after there is a ceasefire and after the conflict ends in Gaza and Lebanon, because there must be a political horizon. I'm convinced now that the political horizon must include Palestinian self-determination, and that's because Arab states that Israel needs to be supportive of it are now very clear that that has to happen. The marginalisation of the Palestinian issue, as well as the settlement issue, is one of the reasons we are where we are. But thinking about your question, Israel will act in its own interest. It believes fundamentally that, of course, it was under existential attack, both from Hamas and from Hezbollah. The Hezbollah actions have a huge support in the state of Israel. And in a democratic country, that matters. But our argument, the argument of friends with Israel, is defending yourself as you must is one thing, but if you want to resolve the issue and have your people live in peace, the way in which you have gone about it, by marginalising the Palestinian issue, dividing the Palestinian leadership, covertly supporting Hamas, is not the answer. It's more than a military. It isn't just a military answer. It has to be a political answer. Now, we can say that to Israel. The evidence of it listening is, at the moment, sort of not conclusive.
But why not cut arms if they refuse to listen?
Well, for the United Kingdom, cutting 0.1% of Israel's arms supply won't really make any difference. It's not a question of arms. The United Kingdom's influence in relation to that
it will save some lives, surely. Those F-35 bombers that are made with UK parts are killing some women, children and innocent people in Gaza. Those lives could be spared.
The government has given an answer as to why F-35s are not included in the recent arms control issue, but the overwhelming support for the state of Israel in physical terms comes from the United States. Nothing will happen unless the United States changes its position, or politically Israel sees that its friends in the region, and it now needs the UAE and the Saudis and others, if it's to realise its ambitions in the region, they will have more sway than they've ever had before. That, coupled with the United States, could make a difference. But the United States is not going to change its position in relation to the defence of Israel now, and certainly not in the run-up to an election.
OK, let's hear from Sarah Olney.
I think what we're all agreed on to a certain extent is that there can't be a sustainable security for Israel, which is what at least the Israeli people want, without a diplomatic solution, a political solution, and whatever's happening there right now, there has to be eventually a political solution, a diplomatic solution, and that's why we're calling. That's why the Liberal Democrats have been calling for a ceasefire, because ultimately you can't get what you want through, purely military means.
Both sides, if neither side want a ceasefire, you're whistling in the wind, aren't you?
That doesn't stop us wanting it. That
Which
doesn't
side
stop
are you
us
talking
calling
about?
for it.
Well,
neither
I
side
think it's
of the
quite
two
clear
or three?
that well, all right, well, let's say three. But I mean, Netanyahu clearly thinks that he's winning in both Gaza and Lebanon. I think he's probably right in Lebanon. Not so sure about Gaza, even though I think a lot of the Hamas military structure has been destroyed. But you need two to tango. And if neither of them want to tango, it's all very well Western countries sort of constantly say we need a ceasefire, we need a two-state solution. It's not going to happen anytime soon, is it?
I think the important thing is that at least the Israeli people who elect their government, can hear that the international community are saying, while we support your right to defend yourself, a lasting peace is not going to come about through military means. There has to be, a pathway to a two-state solution, and that has to start with a ceasefire. And I think at least if that message is coming very clearly from the international community, the Israeli people at least can hear it.
Rachel, what do you think on that? Because, from where I sit, words are fine, but there seems no prospect in the immediate future or even the medium term that any of this can happen.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it's heart-shredding to watch for everyone in that region. It's absolutely unbearable. Look, these are all just words unless people actually, back their words with action. And as we've seen, the US has no intention. It's clear now that the whole purpose of the Biden administration saying, we're trying, we're getting increasingly upset with Netanyahu, he just won't listen to us, boo-hoo-hoo, is all just cover for them actually not wanting to stop this war. If they wanted to, they could. They've just bankrolled more, I don't know how many, 7, 8, 9 billion pounds worth of aid to Israel. How is that going to bring about an end to this endless, appalling suffering for Palestinians and now for Lebanese people? There is just no political will coming from the West to push this. And therefore, one has to assume at some point that despite all the hand-wringing, this is actually congruent with the US's geopolitical appraisal of the region. And it does beg the question for millions of people watching this around the world. It begs the question, yes, Israelis have a right to live in security. Of course, they have the right not to be exposed to the atrocities of October 7. But why is it that for the Western leaders, the safety of Israel comes at the cost of this desperate, horrendous loss of life and terrorising of Israel's neighbours?
This WhatsApp message here kind of sums up what you've just been saying, I guess. Israel cannot kill its way out of this. It's a pretty stark way of putting it.
That is right, and we would all agree with that.
Would you agree, and we've got two representatives of political parties here, that in order to help in Israel, you've got to be a little bit cruel to be kind? So in the event of a ceasefire, if you're talking about drawing the wound that is, drawing the pus from the wound that is the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the encirclement of Gaza, in other words, do the Israelis need to face sanctions of some kind in order to force them to the table to discuss a long-term peace with the Palestinians? Is that something your parties would endorse?
Well, I wouldn't know what my party's endorse because I'm not a part of it presently or have any say. What I will say is none of us have spoken about the extraordinary trauma that Israel experienced on October the 7th and what a lasting impression that has made. This is a people who had their security taken away from them. Proportionately, the deaths on October the 7th were greater than 9/11. It was that degree of shock for the state of Israel. I'm not sure you can hit people over the head and tell them they're going to be secure. But one thing I believe is the politics of Israel over the last 20, 30 years has not made them secure. There must be another way. I think that comes through a realisation that living with their neighbour is better than having constant enmity with their neighbour and not resolving the fundamental issue of the Palestinians. But I'm not sure you can tell people that. I'm not sure that sanctions alone is the way to do it. That may come in relation to settlements and things like that, but that's a different issue. In the first place, the families that lost people on the border of Gaza need to find something that gives them a sense that they are safe and secure, as they do in northern Israel, as they should do in southern Lebanon. And God knows how the people of Gaza are going to recover from the total devastation of Gaza now. These things need to be thought through, and that needs to be part of the politics of not just physical reconstruction, but political reconstruction, which the cost of sanctions may play a part, but there's other things to be done in the meantime.
Let's run through a few text and WhatsApp messages here. Can't read the name there. Semi, is it? It says, what about the trauma of the Palestinian people?
Yeah.
Since 1948.
Correct.
Which is a fair point to make.
When I talk about the marginalisation of the Palestinian issue, that is the thing that has been missed and not resolved yet.
And the other thing is that one can understand the trauma that Israelis are dealing with post 7th of October, of course. But again, what about the trauma that countries that neighbour Israel are now dealing with? What about the trauma of Palestinians in Gaza who are losing untold numbers of their families?
17,000 orphans. Where are they?
15,000 kids who have died, the tens of thousands who've been maimed. How are they ever going to get over what's happened? And it's constantly the case that we focus on Israel and its right to security. But what about everyone else?
Okay.
Why don't they have the same right?
Right. The Prime Minister is going to speak in about 8 minutes' time, we're told. These things always tend to slip, but it was supposed to be 8:30. We're told now it's 8:40. So let's get the news headlines on LBC at 8:33 with Tim Daly.
The White House is saying United States warships have helped to shoot down Iranian missiles directed at Israel this evening. It's thought around 200 were fired towards the country following the start of the Israeli ground offensives into the south of Lebanon. State television in Iran is reporting hypersonic Fatah missiles were used. Downing Street says the UK completely condemns Iran's actions and is reiterating calls for de-escalation across the region. Hamas has praised the attack, and the Israeli police are also saying half a dozen people were killed during a shooting in the Jaffa part of Tel Aviv at around the same time as this evening's attack. According to them, 2 shooters were neutralised. LBC weather, a mostly cloudy night with some light showers for much of England and Wales, largely dry further north with a low of 3 degrees.
This is LBC.
aware.org.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:36. Somebody had the temerity to text in and call Rachel Shabi one brave lady.
That must really
So you have a
upset
fan?
you.
No, it doesn't upset me at all. You and I have always gotten very well.
Yes.
We have Sarah Olney with us, Liberal Democrat Cabinet Office spokesperson and MP for Richmond Park. Now, you've changed jobs, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I'm never quite sure what Cabinet Office really means.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting stuck in and to finding out more about it. But I mean, basically, it's machinery of government stuff. The Cabinet Office of the head of the civil service. So it's some of it will be as soon as we're back next week. We have a bill coming to the House of Commons about hereditary peers. So that's going to be quite significant. Something I'll be leading for the Liberal Democrats on. Something I'm very much looking
Have they abandoned this idea of stopping people being peers at the age of 80?
I think that's going to be part of the legislation, which obviously we'll be scrutinising in detail. But we'll wait and see exactly what.
Is that a good idea?
I think one of the issues is that, well, obviously, quite a significant proportion of the current House of Lords are probably over that age. I mean, I think there's a number of different things that we would want to be looking for in that legislation. But, I mean, the House of Lords has a role in terms of not having people who are kind of swayed by the day-to-day politics or answerable to constituents. I think there's definitely a role for those in the second chamber. But it's one of the largest legislative chambers in the world. It's larger than the Commons, which is the elected chamber. So it is about making sure we got the right balance between your elected representatives and a revising chamber, which is what the House of Lords should be.
I know you haven't answered my question, though. Should the above 80s be axed? Given that you're about to scrutinise the legislation.
Yes.
Yes. Should there be a minimum age? We've seen some whippersnappers come in.
I think the reason I'm finding that hard is kind of like it's not necessarily about the age. There's still plenty of people who are over 80 who've got plenty to contribute. So it is like, what is the?
I went to see Jackie Smith make her debut as Universities Minister, and Ken Baker, age 83, made the most amazing speech. And I did think, yeah, but you're going to be out soon. This is you won't get that kind of sort of breadth of knowledge. But anyway, we're not talking about universities here. We have Rachel Shabi with us and Alistair Burt as well, and Sam Kiley. Let's go to a WhatsApp question. James on the island of Jersey. Why don't we just say Jersey? This is Israel's best chance to degrade Iran's capability and chances of developing nuclear weapons. If they don't take it, Israel risks having a much more formidable enemy in the future, surely. Convince me otherwise, Sam Kiley.
All right. I think that will be a calculation that the Netanyahu government has definitely made. Whether they actually act upon it will really depend on whether they think they're going to get enough backing from the United States in an escalation and attacks inside Iranian territory as such. But they certainly have the kind of legal framework for that, since they would be justified under international law for counterattacking against ballistic missiles that have been fired against their territory in the absence.
The Prime Minister is speaking. Let's go to Downing Street.
But I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis, to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. It cannot be tolerated. We stand with Israel and we recognise her right to self-defence in the face of this aggression. Iran must stop these attacks, together with its proxies like Hezbollah. Iran has menaced the Middle East for far too long. Chaos and destruction brought not just to Israel, but to the people they live amongst in Lebanon and beyond. Make no mistake, Britain stands full square against such violence. We support Israel's reasonable demand for the security of its people. I've spoken today to Prime Minister Netanyahu, the King of Jordan, President Macron, and Chancellor Scholz. In the last week, I've also spoken to other leaders, including Prime Minister McCarthy of Lebanon, President Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, to try to find the space for a political solution to the conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza. Because I am deeply concerned that the region is on the brink, and I'm deeply concerned about the risk of miscalculation. The situation in Lebanon is increasingly grave. I want to repeat my advice to British nationals who are still in Lebanon. You must leave now. You should register your presence with government officials on our website. We have a chartered flight, and we're doing everything we can to get people out. But the situation is extremely volatile. So if you have the means to leave, the time is now. Do not wait. I'll now take questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First of all, is the UK prepared to use British military capabilities to help Israel defend itself against Iran, and has that already happened this evening?
This, as you'll appreciate, is an evolving situation. But what I will say is that we stand with Israel and her right to self-defence, and any relevant updates will be provided in due course.
And on that phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu this evening, you and other world leaders have been calling for a ceasefire, for de-escalation in the region. It doesn't seem that those calls are being heard. Can you give us any more detail on what you said tonight to him?
Well, I won't go into the full details, but in all of the calls I've been making with world leaders, I have expressed my concern that the region is on the brink and there's a high risk of miscalculation, and therefore we have to find a route to de-escalate on all fronts. And in the end, the only solution here is a political solution. So my calls have been about the importance of creating the space and the conditions for that de-escalation and to find that political route forward. With Prime Minister Netanyahu, I also was able to make the case for a ceasefire in Gaza, and importantly, to repeat that the hostages must be released unconditionally and immediately, because we must never lose sight of the hostages who've been held for such a long time now. Thank you.
So what is your message to Israel now? Are you again calling for restraint? Because they would argue that didn't deter a second attack.
Well, my message very clearly tonight is to condemn this attack by Iran, to recognise in clear terms Israel's right to security and to defend herself, and I say that in absolutely clear terms. Obviously, I think all parties are concerned to ensure this doesn't spiral into a much bigger conflict, but on the principle of Israel's right to self-defence, I've been very, very clear. Thank you very much.
Minister there making a statement. I'm not sure what was new in that statement, but the phrase that struck me from that, Alistair, let's come to you on this. He said the risk of miscalculation. That is real, isn't it?
Oh, yes. As we were discussing earlier, should one of the missiles from Iran get through Israel's very significant defences, and possibly the defences mounted by other states that shot them down in April and may have been involved again, if one should land on a significant civilian target, then all restraints in Israel will be gone because their population will demand. What this might trigger is an attack on nuclear facilities. I think at the moment Iran will be extremely wary of not provoking Israel to allow such an opportunity, because it knows that Israel would like to do this and it does not want to take the risk of those facilities being lost. Iran's main interest is the regime's survival. It's not a happy place domestically. We all know this. Its population is not behind the regime. Its population has complained and protested in the past about the amount of money being spent on foreign activities and the like. So the regime will be wary. Under attack, its population will, of course, swing round if it believes it's attacked. So I think Iran will be very wary of doing anything that would allow Israel to say, we told you so, all brakes are off. And that's the risk of miscalculation, of something going wrong, I think the Prime Minister is referring to.
Right, we'll come back to more of your questions in a moment. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:45.
This is LBC.
for life.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:48 on LBC. Sarah Olney, Alistair, Burt, Rachel Shabi and Sam Kiley with us. Now, Rachel, you've got a new book coming out soon. It's called Off-White, The Truth About Anti-Semitism. Explain.
Well,
30-second or 1 minute elevator pitch.
The book is looking at why the subject of anti-Semitism has become such...
Because you are Jewish yourself.
Yes, and Israeli-born. The book looks at why anti-Semitism has become such a battleground in our political and media conversations, so why we can't seem to be able to talk about it in a way that is meaningful, relevant, helpful, or even safe. And it ranges from a whole host of things, from the inability of anti-racists to tether it to the wider anti-racist movement, to see it as connected and a part of a trajectory of racisms, to perceptions people have of Israel, to the way that critics of Israel are accused of anti-Semitism in order to shut down Palestine advocacy, to the hypocrisy that it seems that you can be as anti-Semitic as you like as long as you support Israel, as we've seen with far-right leaders across the world, as we've seen with Christian Zionists. So it's all these different and quite contradictory reasons that have contributed to this sort of dumpster fire conversation that we're having, at a time when, of course, it's vitally important to be able to speak out for Palestinians, and also at a time when anti-Semitism is spiralling globally.
Did you feel when you were writing it that you're basically walking a tightrope on every page?
I mean, it was commissioned and conceived long before October 7, so I certainly wasn't expecting to be writing it in the face of this absolutely era-defining, heartbreaking assault on Gaza. But what I actually found was, because this was really, it's such a knotty issue, and it was actually a bit of a relief to be able to tease out all the different strands of how we've got into this mess and figure out just a better way forward for everyone.
Right, let's go to a text question from Ruth in Norwich. Keir Starmer wouldn't say if British armed forces have helped Israel fight off the Iranian missiles tonight. Should we be involved? Alistair?
Yes, if we believed that Iranian missiles were going to hit civilian areas, I think the United Kingdom's pledge to defend the existence of the State of Israel is a very strong one. And just as we were involved in April, as were the Saudis, as were Jordan, I wouldn't see it as difficult that we would maintain that stance now.
Some people might say, well, Iran is a sovereign country. If Israel was sending missiles over to Iran, then maybe people should be involved in shooting those down too.
Well, that will not be the United Kingdom. Israel is an ally of the United Kingdom. We have a security relationship with it in many different ways. And as repeated governments have made clear, the existence of the State of Israel against the many threats is a fundamental of UK foreign policy. That would be the reason behind it. It's not a decision that someone would take at 6 o'clock in the evening saying, well, should we support this or should we not? You've got to have a policy in place. But it's notable, of course, that the policy is in relation to missiles coming into Israel, but there's no involvement of British forces in Lebanon or anything like that. So I think there's a distinction between the two, but I think if British forces were involved in
there are British forces in Lebanon, aren't there? Aren't they training the Lebanese army?
They're training the Lebanese army, not Hezbollah.
Oh, no.
Or the Israelis.
That would be a story, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Sarah Olney.
Sorry, you're asking me about...
I'm asking Ruth in Norwich's question. Should Britain be involved in shooting down these missiles?
I mean, I probably just reflect a lot of what Alistair has just said there. Obviously, Israel are an ally. They are, much as we may not like the Israeli government, they're a democratically elected government. This is an assault by Iran. And I can only kind of support what the Prime Minister was saying there about, wanting to condemn that because, and I think that's an important position that we need to state.
Rachel?
Well, the thing is that Again, we're back to the same thing, which is, yes, Israel has the right to defend itself, but what about Lebanon? What about Palestinians in Gaza? What about Palestinians in the West Bank? Why are they not afforded the same right? And I just find it interesting that, you know, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, decides to start the clock now. We've had a week of Israel ramping up, escalating the situation with, as we say, the terror attack of the pager attacks, and then
But that was in response to Hezbollah firing rockets over into Israel, wasn't it?
Well, yes, but where do we start the clock? Because Hezbollah is firing rockets into Israel. By the way, according to, I think, both the BBC and UN, Israel has been firing rockets disproportionately into Lebanon prior to this escalation. But if all of these agents in the axis of resistance, as they call themselves, are saying, this is a second front in support of Palestinians in Gaza. The way to stop this is to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Why are we ignoring that? Why are we constantly ignoring that? Why are we ignoring the reality that...
Okay, but just answer the question, though. Should we be involved in shooting down Iranian missiles that are about to land in Israel?
Israel's got an Iron Dome defence system. It's extremely sophisticated and capable.
It doesn't shoot down everyone. If the United Kingdom and the United States can prevent missiles landing in Israel, should they?
If they can prevent missiles from landing in Gaza, should they? Or in Lebanon, should they?
Well, you're answering a question with a question.
Because what kind of a question is it? Why is it such a one-sided
question? It's either yes or no.
No.
Well, that happens to be the question that the listener has asked.
Okay.
So, you don't think we should, Sam?
I think given that it's an attack from a sovereign state against a sovereign state, against a state that the United Kingdom considers an ally, inevitably the United Kingdom probably should and may well get involved if there's an additional wave, not least in order to try to help prevent the loss of civilian life, a danger of loss of civilian life that Alistair alluded to, which could ignite an even worse problem across the Middle East. I note with interest, though, much closer to home, British forces have never been involved in shooting down Russian missiles raining down on Ukrainian territory. Well, I've spent a lot of the last couple of years and indeed denied the Ukraine the military aid to defend itself in 2014. So there are double standards in play all over the place. That is just one of the sort of tragedies of realpolitik and the business of international affairs. They never seem to go in a logical or even sometimes ethical direction. But in that narrow question, I would say, sure, let's prevent other people dying so that people further down, fewer people down the line would die.
Bombing the village to save the village.
No, it's not. It's shooting down a missile that is not going to stop anything. I mean, you're going to stop people dying if you shoot down a missile. It's not destroying a village.
But Israel can shoot down its own missiles, as we know.
Well, I mean, if you can help to prevent people dying, that would be a good thing in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with that.
Another question about
what's the way to prevent it?
Should pressure be put on Israel to dial down very substantially and on the killing of Palestinians in Gaza? The answer would be absolutely.
Right.
And there should be all sorts of levers put into place and should have been exercised very early on, precisely to prevent the clash of civilizations that we saw after October 7 and we saw after 9/11. In both cases, violent, recidivist criminal organizations provoked big, powerful nations into a massive overreaction, and the world paid the consequence. Boxing clever is always a way, I think, to win a boxing fight.
So we agree that Israel's escalation across the region has only made things worse and will only engender more extremism, just as it did after 9/11, and will only make things worse for the entire region, including for Israel itself. We agree on that.
I'm not speaking for anybody else.
No, I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, I think it's a rather more nuanced question, and my answer would be rather more nuanced. I think that the conduct of Israel in Gaza has made the future stability of the region extremely tenuous, and indeed the longevity of the Jewish state as the Jewish state also tenuous. So I don't think it serves either the interests of Israel or indeed the region.
I can answer this question from Lynn. Does Sam Kiley work for the BBC?
No, I don't think they'd let me on the premises.
He has worked for Sky and he has worked for CNN. I don't know whether you think that's acceptable, Lynn, but no, he does not work for the BBC. Because if he did, he wouldn't be allowed to come on this show for 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, listen, we normally have a fun question at the end, but it kind of doesn't seem appropriate today. So I'm going to ask you to reflect on the fact that President Jimmy Carter is 100 years old today, which I think it's a remarkable achievement. He's the only former US president to make it to 100. Sarah Olney, I mean, he's one of those presidents. I mean, I think he wasn't a good president, and I don't intend to speak ill of someone who's 100 years old, but I think he's had an excellent sort of after presidency, hasn't he?
I think that's right. It's tricky for me to comment. He was president when I was born, so I don't have much lived experience of the Jimmy Carter presidency.
Alistair,
I think that's right, and I think it does just go to show sometimes, the value, and just coming back to what we were saying about the House of Lords, maybe the value of people who are no longer in the front line of politics, but have had that experience of being right in the middle of some of the very knotty issues we've been talking about tonight. Actually, that kind of afterlife can really provide a value.
It's not yet in the afterlife. Alistair.
I was a patron for some years in the United Kingdom of an organisation called Habitat for Humanity, which Jimmy Carter devoted a great deal of his life after he was president. This built homes all over the world using people's own labour to build something for themselves. And he
actually went and built them himself.
There were these mass builds that people went out, and he went out with tools to do the job and all that. But his humility is what struck people, that having been the most powerful person in the world for some time, that he was able to assume the characteristics of a humble man who served his people honestly, and that gave him a great deal of prestige amongst many. He's been a good man, and actually we don't use that phrase often enough, and it's not always applicable, but Jimmy Carter has been a good man.
And Habitat for Humanity, I think they've announced they're building 30 extra houses today to celebrate his birthday.
Absolutely right. A wonderful organisation.
I really agree with Sarah about the accrued wisdom and experience that comes with age and how valuable it is. And sometimes we don't pay attention to that as much as we should. And I really see it in someone like Jimmy Carter. I remember in the mid-2000s, he was quite collected to Israel-Palestine as an issue, and he wrote a book which I'm going to mistitle. It's called something like Peace, Not Apartheid. So even then he could see the writing on the wall, and what the options were absent political solution in that region.
Sam?
I'm not so sure why he's often derided as an ineffective president but a great man afterwards. Perhaps one of the characteristics of him as president is that he was a man of great ethical and moral fibre, and was seen as having failed to play the game of politics sufficiently well. Of course, present company accepted. I wish we had more people like that in politics.
Well, on that controversial bombshell note, thank you to all.
Kiley lashes out shot.
Yes, right. Thank you to all four of you for joining us this evening on it's been quite a difficult evening in some ways to sort of know should we even go ahead with Cross Question. But I'm glad you all came in and have answered the questions so eloquently. Tomorrow night's panel includes the entrepreneur Robin Scott, the Conservative activist and anti-discrimination campaigner Albi Amankona, and the former Labour advisor Paul Richards. We will spend another hour talking about Israel and Lebanon and Iran and the whole of the Middle East. Sam Kiley is staying with us. We're releasing our other three panellists now, but thanks to them for joining us. So coming up in the next hour, more discussion. I want to take more of your calls, and particularly if you live in Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, wherever in the Middle East, we'd love to hear from you, because there's nothing like hearing from people actually on the spot. But many of you in this country have your very strong views on what's going on in the Middle East from one point of view or another. We'll take more of your calls in this hour than maybe we have done over the course of the last 2 hours. The number to call, 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.